Welcome to Fluent Vibes. Today, we're talking about something that frustrates almost everyone who has ever tried to master grammar. Those pesky grammar myths. Yes, those rules that haunt us, make us doubt ourselves, and sometimes even make us feel less smart when we write or speak. But here's the truth. Many of those so-called rules? Myths. Plain and simple. Isn't that incredible to think about? Grammar myths have a way of sticking with us like old superstitions. Like don't walk under a ladder, or breaking a mirror means 7 years of bad luck. But the thing is, much like those superstitions, these grammar myths aren't rooted in fact. They're just passed down unquestioned. Today, we're going to bust those myths wide open. By the end of this, you'll feel empowered to break the so-called rules and embrace the flexibility, beauty, and creativity of language. Ready? Let's dive in. Myth number 1, never start a sentence with and or but. The infamous never start a sentence with a conjunction rule. How many of you have been told that starting with and or but is a mistake? Maybe you've even avoided doing it in emails or essays because it felt wrong. Well, let me tell you something. Not only is it not wrong, but it's also one of the most natural ways to write and speak. Imagine this. You're telling a story to a friend. You say, "We went to the beach, and it was so beautiful." Does that sound unnatural? Of course not. Starting with and adds excitement, builds connection, and keeps the listener hooked. It makes your language flow. The idea that you can't start with and or but is an old school belief passed down from prescriptive grammarians, people who tried to make English follow rules similar to Latin. But English is its own thing, and starting with a conjunction is perfectly fine when it suits the tone or rhythm of your sentence. For example, I was ready to give up, but then something incredible happened. She called me last night, and we talked for hours. Can you feel the energy in those sentences? Don't let this myth hold you back. Use and but at the start of your sentences if it feels right. Myth number 2, you must never split an infinitive. If you've ever hesitated to say something like to truly understand or to boldly go, this myth might have its claws in you. Splitting an infinitive simply means putting a word, usually an adverb, between to and the verb. Some people argue that it's incorrect, but let me tell you, that's nonsense. Here's the deal. The idea that you can't split an infinitive comes from, you guessed it, Latin grammar. In Latin, infinitives are one word, like amare, meaning to love, so you physically can't split them. Some grammarians decided that because you can't split infinitives in Latin, you shouldn't split them in English either. But guess what? English isn't Latin. Splitting infinitives often makes sentences more natural and expressive. Let's look at some examples. To truly understand someone, you need to listen. To boldly go where no one has gone before. Imagine rewriting those as truly to understand someone or to go boldly. It feels stiff, doesn't it? Splitting infinitives gives you more flexibility and allows you to emphasize the most important part of the sentence. So go ahead, split those infinitives confidently. Myth number 3, don't end a sentence with a preposition. Here's a rule that can make even the most confident writers second-guess themselves. Ending a sentence with a preposition, words like with, to, or at, is supposedly wrong. But is it really? No way. Let me ask you this. If someone says, "Who are you talking to?" Does that sound natural? Now imagine they said, "To whom are you talking?" It sounds formal, old-fashioned, and frankly a bit awkward, doesn't it? The no prepositions at the end rule comes from, you guessed it again, Latin grammar. In Latin, it's impossible to end a sentence with a preposition, so some grammarians tried to apply the same logic to English. But English works differently, and ending a sentence with a preposition is often the most natural choice. Consider these examples. This is the person I was talking about. What are you waiting for? Forcing the preposition to the middle can make sentences clunky and unnatural. So the next time someone says, "Don't end a sentence with a preposition," feel free to respond, "That's a rule I can't get behind." Myth number 4, passive voice is always wrong. Don't use passive voice. This advice is so common that it's almost become a mantra. But here's the thing, the passive voice isn't wrong. It's just a tool. Like any tool, it's useful in the right situations. The active voice focuses on the subject performing the action. The dog chased the cat. The passive voice flips it around, focusing on the recipient of the action. The cat was chased by the dog. Passive voice gets a bad rap because it can make writing seem vague or overly formal, but sometimes it's exactly what you need. For instance, a decision has been made. Passive voice keeps the focus on the decision, not who made it. Mistakes were made. This famous phrase uses passive voice to avoid pointing fingers. So is passive voice bad? No, it's just another option in your grammar toolbox. Use it when it serves your purpose. Myth number 5, contractions are too informal. How many of you have been told not to use contractions like don't, can't, or it's in formal writing? This myth makes writing feel stiff and unnatural. But here's the truth. Contractions are part of how we speak and think, and avoiding them can make your writing sound robotic. For example, do not be afraid of making mistakes. Don't be afraid of making mistakes. Which version feels warmer and more approachable? The second one, right? Contractions can absolutely be used in formal writing, especially when the tone is conversational or persuasive. The key is to know your audience and purpose. If contractions help you connect with your reader, use them confidently. Myth number 6, grammar rules are set in stone. Let's address the biggest myth of all, the idea that grammar rules are fixed and unchanging. Language evolves, my friends. The way we speak and write today is different from how people did 100, 200, or 500 years ago. And guess what? That's a good thing. Take the word literally, for example. It used to mean in a literal sense, but now it's often used for emphasis, like, I literally died laughing. Some people get upset about this shift, but it's a natural part of language evolution. Words and rules change as society changes. Think about Shakespeare. He broke every grammar rule you can imagine, inventing words and playing with sentence structure to create works of art. If Shakespeare followed strict grammar rules, we wouldn't have lines like, to thine own self be true. Isn't that amazing? So what's the lesson here? Grammar myths can hold us back, making us feel like we're doing something wrong when we're just using language naturally. But language isn't about following rigid rules. It's about communication, expression, and connection. Break the myths. Start sentences with and or but. Split infinitives if it feels right. End sentences with prepositions when it sounds natural. Use passive voice when it serves your purpose. And remember, the most important rule of all is to make your language work for you. Doesn't that feel liberating? Thank you so much for tuning into Fluent Vibes. I hope this episode has helped you see grammar in a whole new light. Until next time, stay curious, stay bold, and keep exploring the beauty of language.